Recently, Tufenkian Foundation celebrated its 20th anniversary with a public event in New York City. The event, which took place at the Tufenkian Artisan Carpets showroom in Manhattan, focused on one of Armenia's most pressing social, economic, and environmental issues: responsible mining and the activism surrounding it.
The foundation has many projects, but this is one of our central projects. The environmental realm, one of our main focuses is on mining, which is one of the most difficult sectors of Armenia's economy. Frankly, mining holds great potential for the country, but it has been run in a very uneven, I would say even corrupt fashion. In developed countries, mining provides for a large percentage of the GDP of a country through tax revenue. In Armenia, it provides for very little. It has very difficult environmental effects and public health effects if not practiced responsibly. So the foundation is working through the MLRI, the Mining Legislation Reform Initiative, to develop progressive legislation through Parliament. And we're hoping that the government will work together with us to develop good laws that are enforceable, not to do away with mining, but to make it clean and responsible. Of course, the foundation does many other things too. We work also in Karabakh, where we promote resettlement of the border areas, providing housing support, clinics, drinking water supplies, and other things that enable the population there to live amid very difficult conditions.
Open to the public, the event featured presentation by Serj Tankian, Tufenkian Foundation's founder and president James Tufenkian, as well as Varant Meguerditchian, manager of Mining Legislation Reform Initiative, MLRI.
Very difficult to balance the economic and environmental interests when it comes to mining in Armenia. There's no doubt that mining has a serious impact on Armenia's economy. You're looking at about 3 and a little bit more % of state revenue comes from the mining sector, and that's critical in a developing economy. So we need to make sure that that continues and grows into the future. But we need to remember at what cost that's going to be. So if we want to have mining and we want to have that boost to the economy, we need to make sure that at the same time we're caring for the environment. We're not polluting our rivers. We're not making sure that heavy metals enter the food stream. That's a critical problem. And the costs of that, the economic costs in the long term, will far outweigh the economic benefits today. So we really need to take a look at being responsible with the way we do mining. That doesn't mean we stop mining. That means we look at it, we assess it, we make it better, we make it work for Armenia and Armenia's people.
In her welcoming remarks, Marisa Mesropian-Fisher from Tufenkian Artisan Carpets gave background information about Tufenkian Foundation, its mission and activity.
James launched the Tufenkian Foundation in 1999 to address the pressing social, economic, cultural, and environmental challenges facing Armenia. For almost 2 decades, the Foundation has worked to meet these needs by pioneering projects that create changes in Armenian society. To date, the Foundation has completed more than 70 projects in Armenia, including building and renovating houses, schools and clinics, supporting wounded soldiers, and building water supply and irrigation systems. While in Artsakh, cultivating its fertile lands and creating employment opportunities. Importantly, the Foundation's aims are large-scale projects with the aim to create tangible and sustainable outcomes.
Then she invited Andranik Kasparian, Tufenkian Foundation board member and director of development, who spoke about the progress Foundation has made over the years in assisting Armenia and Artsakh with its humanitarian work, including Foundation's support for MLRI.
The Tufenkian Foundation, I believe, occupies a special place among charitable organizations because we don't simply hand out money and we don't simply give grants. We've always tried to help people to help themselves. And we have always tried to fill gaps where no one else is willing or able to do the right thing for Armenia and for Karabakh. So we've taken our precious resources, tried to fill vacuums, tried to play a venture role, if you will, planting a seed, hoping that that seed will bloom and grow into something, whether that be small NGOs in the 2000s that we helped to form in the environmental and social realm, when activism was still a new thing in the streets of Armenia.
whether that is resettlement activity in the borderlands of Artsakh, particularly the liberated territories, those green zones where no one really works. We took that on as sort of a sacred mission, that if we're going to keep Karabakh and take these borderlands off the table, off the negotiating table, we need to resettle them and economically develop them. So over 20 years, I think we've put our money where our mouth is. We have not stayed the same over 20 years. We've moved gradually from an emphasis on social protection to more and more supporting civic responsibility, civic activism, which in a sense mirrors the changes that are ongoing in Armenia today. As part of my job, I have to check our impact through our website, through our social media, through our Facebook presence. But when you do that, it's a double-edged sword. It's a curse and a blessing. Because when you put stuff up on Facebook, you have to deal with the responses. And as you know, the responses can range from here to here and beyond. So when we advertised this event, I kind of got ticked off at first because a few wise guys who were in the mining industry in Armenia said, the Tufenkian Foundation's against mining. This event is designed to torpedo the mining industry, and they're bringing a rock star who doesn't know anything about mining, whatever. So I bit my tongue. I really wanted to give it to him, but I said, better to just leave it alone. We are not against mining per se. We want mining to be practiced responsibly. And this is why the Tufenkian Foundation is the principal funder of the MLRI, the Mining Legislation Reform Institute, which is designed to promote and ultimately pass legislation in Parliament that is enforceable, that will create a new regime for mining that is clean, progressive, and hopefully will actually feed into the state coffers and enrich the country, rather than enriching the pockets of the few.
Known for his accomplishments as lead singer for System of a Down, Serj Tankian has become increasingly vocal on a range of issues in Armenia, including the adverse effect of irresponsible mining. In his speech, Mr. Tankian expressed his support for Armenia's environmental activism and touched on several environmental topics, including his vocal opposition to the Amul Sar mine near Jermuk. He also expressed optimism for the new government of Armenia to improve the country's environmental laws and protections.
Mining licenses were given out like chiclets during the previous regime, with very little benefit to the state coffers and with questionable independent environmental assessment reports. Save Terut Forest was the first initiative that I got involved with years ago. After years of protests and the mine doing its damage to the environment, it took a young Danish activist who interned at Civilitas in Armenia to report back the terrible environmental impact of the mine, causing the Danish state to pull its investments and in turn causing the mine to go offline. The Armenian state wasn't paying attention to its own activists, while the more transparent Danish state was. Overall, mines offer short-term employment for locals while damaging the environment permanently. A healthy ecosystem is our lungs, and there are many other ecologically prudent methods to create industries utilizing such land. But it's very important to support such communities tempted or ravaged by mining.
I've been involved with the Tufenkian Foundation a few years ago. I went to Artsakh with the foundation, and when the foundation was giving away homes to some displaced Armenians in the liberated territories, so that was a wonderful experience. But I really feel like mining overall, especially open pit mining, is incredibly dangerous to our environment and in long-term damage compared to short-term profits. But the new government, as you can see already, is much more into doing its due diligence to make sure that the environment assessment reports were properly done. They're doing their own environmental assessment report right now, so the government's doing that due diligence, and there's a lot of pressure being put on by the US government and Canada, who's representing the investors in that mine. And my personal take on it, following the environmental movement in Armenia, following what's been going on in the past with mining in Armenia, is this mine could be very dangerous to our water supply in Armenia, leading all the way to Lake Sevan. And so there's been a lot of protests with local Jermuk residents and environmental organizations protesting it. The government's been incredible in the sense that they've actually listened to the people for the first time in, you know, in the last 25 years. But they're doing their due diligence, and then they're going to make the right choice based on the science of the environmental assessment report and all the surveys that are involved. The problem is, in a corrupt system that was the past, we couldn't trust what information was coming because environmental assessment reports were done that we couldn't rely on, you know. And deals were done that we couldn't rely on. Licenses were given out in conditions where it wouldn't happen here or in Canada, you know, for example. So it's very important to really stay on top of that, and also to support the communities that benefit from mining. You know, people that work in the area. I think it's important because they're very vulnerable.
Through slideshow presentation, Varant Meguerditchian, manager of Mining Legislation Reform Initiative (MLRI), gave a snapshot of what Armenian mining sector looks like, outlining systematic problems the industry faces. This included dumping mining waste into rivers and waterways, heavy toxic metal entering the food supply, health effects of mining on local communities, including on children, poorly trained and unprotected workers, among other issues. Mr. Meguerditchian also spoke about the work MLRI is doing, trying to fix these issues.
Look at the licensing rules, they're actually quite weak. So there's no proper cost-benefit analysis that's undertaken when you're about to commence work on a mine. So you already start off on the wrong footing. The next picture that you need to take a look at is the environmental impact assessment. And yeah, they're done, environmental impact assessments are done, but in many, many instances they actually haven't consulted with the communities that are impacted. So the environmental impact assessment is undertaken, but the affected communities themselves aren't considered as part of the impacted communities. We need to take a look at this, and we need to start to think about how we fix it. I've written undocumented health impacts. The reality is, under laws in Armenia, you're actually required to give some attention to the health impacts. The problem therein is that there aren't sufficient guidelines to assist the mining companies to actually write the health impact. So in most cases, they're not actually even completed, and mining licenses are granted without this even being part of the submission. Thinking about Armenia as an area that has a lot of mountains and in the seismic zone, if you obviously have dam constructions that are improper, think about the potential that the damage that overflow can do. Think about the damage that the collapse of a mine wall can do to the region. I mean, we saw what happens in Brazil, and Brazil is substantially larger than Armenia. For an area of 30,000 square kilometres, I say square kilometres because I'm Australian, think about the impact that that might have. At the start of the commencement of a mine, there needs to be a closure plan, and often they're put together, but they're quite weak. And then the money that's set aside, unfortunately, it's a double-edged sword. The companies really haven't put in enough to actually rehabilitate the land, and then any money that's been put forward, unfortunately, is being squandered by previous governments. So they're in a situation now where they've got legacy mines, mines that have closed, and the land hasn't been rehabilitated. We really need to look at that as an additional, I guess, aspect of mining and management into the future that often goes unsaid. And then governance, monitoring, assessment of all of these mines. You know, it's really, really important to make sure that when the laws are in place, the companies are actually complying with those laws, that there's still something in it for the people of Armenia if they do that. So what is the MLRI doing about this? Well, over the last couple of years we've done some incredible research. We've got experts from Armenia and overseas to help us with mine waste management, with land rehabilitation. We've even had a look at the tax regime. We've looked at papers on that, and effectively we've discovered whether the mining companies are actually paying enough tax, are they paying their bit, are they doing what's required of them? Or as yet, is this an area that still requires a little bit more economic review for Armenia? Since then, we've also been in a situation where we've gone and spoken with the local community. So we've had people from Sunik and Kerarkunik and Lori come to our forums and roundtable discussions. We've had activists, we've had academics from the American University of Armenia, we've had academics from the Yerevan State University. They've all come, they've all participated, they've all contributed to helping shape and I guess develop an aggregate of views of what needs to be done in the mining sector. Here's a photo from actually one of our workshops we're really doing things in the country that unfortunately haven't yet been done. And it's a very useful exercise because we believe that the people should be determining their own destiny. This allows them to voice their concerns and starts them off on the right track. So what's next for us? Our key projects, right? We're right at the stage now where we're ready to draft legislation. The first pieces of work that we're looking at is we want to review the mining licensing permit laws. It shouldn't be that easy to get a mining license. We're going to take a look at that. We're going to make sure it's tighter. We're going to make sure that the government has better opportunities not only to govern the situation but also to revoke a mining license if a company hasn't been playing by the rules or living up to the promises that they've said. We're taking a look at that right now. We're also looking at a mining inspection checklist. We're looking at mining inspection laws and making sure that we're empowering the inspectors to be able to do their job. They need to be able to get in there, to inspect the mines, to check the water quality, and right now the system is structured to make them fail. We're helping them out by reviewing that legislation. We're also doing a little bit more research. This is really where the government is actually quite interested. They're interested in the economic impact. We're looking at issues like tax avoidance, and we're also looking into what the economic impact of starting a mine is under the current system. So we have short-term economic gain, but in the long term, if we're going to have to rehabilitate that land, if we're going to have to spend money on making sure that the water quality is improved again, I mean, how much money are we spending, and does it really stack up to start mining in the first place? That's what we really need to take a look at, and that's what we're researching right now. We'll do the research and then we'll start the legislative reform in that space as well. And one more thing I wanted to highlight here is advocacy. Effectively, our job is not only to draft the legislation and do the research, but to actually pitch it to government. We're in a unique situation. It's a new political playing field in Armenia. We have a government that for the first time is prepared to listen. This is a unique situation. I have no doubt that they have a lot of people to listen to, amongst which we are one, and many people who don't share the same opinions as us when it comes to mining. So effectively our job is make sure we get in there, make sure we work with international experts, get the legislation done, put it to them, and build that stakeholder support to get that legislation through and get those changes into effect. That's where we stand right now. That's the precipice we're on, and effectively we're looking for your support to make it happen.
In an emotional speech, founder and president of the foundation, James Tufenkian, spoke about several topics, including corrupt and unfair mining laws that were made during the previous administration, in which a few individuals enriched themselves on the back of the country. Similarly, Mr. Tufenkian expressed great hope of a new government in implementing fair and environmentally sound laws.
So imagine that you own this beautiful piece of land in the countryside. For me, it would be somewhere in the Hudson River Valley. This piece of land has been in your family for generations, and you really love it. But one day you find out, lo and behold, it's got gold under it. And much as you love this land, you're saying, hey, I really could use the money, so I got to try and mine this gold. So you bring in a miner, and the guy says, okay, let's make an agreement. And you say, I'm easy, you know, I just want to get paid fairly for my gold and don't destroy my property unnecessarily. And otherwise you write the agreement, you know. So he comes back the next day with the agreement. You don't even look at it. You just sign on the bottom line. So he starts the mining, and before long, he's doing unbelievable, unimaginable damage to the property that you love. Everything you loved about it is gone. Every day he's carting off truckloads of gold ore. And yet every day you're running to the mailbox and you don't find that big check you were waiting for. Pretty soon you start to understand you've made a really bad deal for selling your gold. This is very similar to the situation Armenia is in right now. The laws governing gold mining, or every kind of mining in Armenia, were basically, in the old administration, written by the same guys who were the primary beneficiaries of the mines. In that kind of scenario, do you think they were spending a lot of time trying to think how they could make the mining arrangement with the country serve the interests of the Armenian people to the best extent? No, they were thinking about their own personal interests, and the laws reflect that. We need the revenue from mining. But we have to do it under a scenario where it's beneficial for the nation. So, 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I started the Mining Legislation Reform Initiative, kind of with an inkling of all of this. And the idea was to create new laws governing mining that would make mining a good deal for the country of Armenia and its people. It would require them to pay the maximum amount of revenue for the minerals they extract and do the least amount of harm to the nation. At that time, a lot of people thought this was really silly. They wanted to pull me aside and say, James John, you know, you have this wonderful innocence about you and this endless optimism, and you're just criminally naive sometimes, though. And do you really think that the same guys who are benefiting from the mining laws just the way they are going to be happy to see you show up with a whole new range of laws that are going to take the money out of their pocket? Are you crazy? Looking back on it, they had a point. But there's a saying I've heard before that I like to cling to sometimes, which is something to the effect that God provides special care for idiots and little children. And I think it was kind of under that provision that this amazing miracle happened last year that sort of makes MLRI look much better than it did 3 years ago. We got a new government, a new revolution came along. This government actually cares about trying to do what's good for the country. And it's a whole new game then for MLRI. The government actually really, they know they have a big problem with mining now. And the problem is they're being crushed from three sides, three competing kind of interests. I mean, on the one hand, they've got activists, communities, and a big part of the population of Armenia who just want to shut down mining because it's so detrimental in terms of its impact. On the other hand, they've got the mining companies with their huge resources, foreign governments behind them and international organizations behind them, demanding the government to remove the obstacles and let mining continue. And then to make it all worse, what the government really desperately needs is revenue. They're starving for revenue and they know mining can provide it. So they know that the laws need to change. The problem is it takes a lot of work in order to prepare to write new laws. As Varant was saying, research and analysis of the old laws to identify the gaps in the legislation, finding out best practices from other countries, assembling experts, creating a team, all of this can take years. And the government needs to act now to have new legislation. Well, fortunately, that's all the kind of work that MLRI has been doing for these last 3 years. So we are ready right now to start writing new laws and to pass them into law.
The event concluded with Q&A with the audience, during which Mr. Tufenkian and other speakers had an opportunity to answer questions from the audience.
Tufenkian believes in philanthropy, not in charity. He believes in investing on the ground directly to the people, to empower people rather than to patronize people. And I'm very proud that I know him. He's a great man and great benefactor. And a very good Armenian. His heart is in the people of Armenia.
I got involved with the Tufenkian Foundation a couple of years ago and joined the Board of Trustees last year, mainly because of the work that the Tufenkian Foundation does with social issues, women in particular, women's refuge, women's rights, this kind of thing in Armenia, which for a number of years these issues just didn't exist. It wasn't that these things weren't even illegal. So domestic violence, these kind of issues were very important to me and my family. And we met Maro Matosyan and Antranik a couple of years ago and actually held a fundraiser in London for the organization, specifically for the Women's Refuge. Over the last couple of years, when I met with James, I understood a lot more about the foundation and other implications. For example, for me, the old style of giving in Armenia was really to give money and not really think about what was being done with it. With the Tufenkian Foundation, they do the work themselves. So rather than just giving money, handouts to people, actually their feet are on the ground and they're doing work, and the impact is noticeable.
This event was not simply a get-together to celebrate 20 years of Tufenkian Foundation's work in Armenia. It was also an opportunity to renew the commitment to future generations by addressing environmental issues and underlining the importance of responsible mining in the country.